Bishop Joe Aldred is one of Britain's best known black church leaders. I asked him if the Black Lives Matters movement in the UK is simply solidarity with black people in America, or whether there is a sense that black lives in the UK matter less than others.
Black Lives Matter has become a mantra made popular by the Black Lives Matter movement in the wake of George Floyd's killing. But in reality, what that is a representative in the modern era of something which goes back, I would argue, to the time of the transatlantic slave trade. And that means that it includes not only Black people in America, but Black people anywhere else in the world who have their roots in that movement of the transatlantic slave trade, in which Black lives did not matter. They were purely merchandise to be captured, bought and sold, and deployed on cotton fields and cane fields and other places to produce the stuff that made the Western world rich. And so their lives did not matter. In fact, there is common knowledge, isn't there, that the American slave was said to be 3/5 the value of a human being. And so this call that Black Lives Matter is a call to say that there needs to be an affirmation that all human beings are made in the image of God, in the likeness of God, and are of equal value, of equal worth.
So you believe that we should obviously pick this issue up. Is there a sense in this country that white people like myself are saying, consciously or unconsciously, black lives don't matter?
If you look at any of the stats that speak to the place, the location of Black, and I would extend that to other minority ethnic people in this country, you will see that there is a lagging behind of the quality of life of Black people in this country. So you could look at education, you can look at employment, you can look at politics, anywhere you care to look, you will see a deficit. COVID has shone a real light on that deficit. So that if you are Black, you're more likely both to contract COVID and to die from COVID in this country. So there's no question that I am here living in this country because my ancestors were taken from Africa, taken to the Caribbean. I was born in Jamaica, and because of the economic deprivation in Jamaica after colonialism, my parents came to England. I also followed them. So the life of a Black person in this country has continued to be one lived within the context of race, within the context of white supremacy, within the context of Black disadvantage in a space where white is right, and as they say in America, but if you're Black, step back.
So what can white people do to demonstrate that Black lives do matter? What can we do politically? What can we do personally?
I think the urgent call to white people must be to understand their whiteness, to understand the place of privilege that being white brings them, not only in this country, but in the world, in fact. And so if it is possible to understand and therefore, and then to dismantle white supremacist structure that is located actually in an ideology about superiority of the lighter skin, that, you know, that the white person is further up the evolutionary chain and the Black person is further down the evolutionary scale. I think many white people, like the white people who owned slaves during the days of slavery, that many of them were housewives, you know, who simply bought shares, if you like, a bit like you'd buy, you know, shares in BT or some other industry. And so many people actually are participants in the racist project that has its roots in white supremacy, but they don't necessarily know that. It's the life they lead. And so the call that I make to white people is actually to read up on the history and not the sanitized version, which comes in school books and other textbooks, but read upon the real history. Read some of the slave narratives, for example, written by the slaves, Olada Equiano and many others. Read some of that, understand the relationship between black and white people, and how black below and white on top has been the way in which we have lived together for the last 600 years or so. That's what I think is the most urgent call to white people. And then when you've read that and you've understood that, then begin to love your neighbor.
But you, like me, lived in Smethwick at one point, and you know that there are white people in Smethwick who are very poor and feel anything but privileged. And asking them to read the account of a slave would they just wouldn't do it. So how do we go with people like that?
I understand that. Well, actually, maybe we ought to find some solidarity here, because the white working class, extend that, the Irish, but let's stick with the English white working class, were as much fodder for the privileged whites as the black people were being dragged out of Africa and being put on plantations. In fact, some of them ended up in the Caribbean as well. So there is something about class as well as race, and I understand that not all white people are rich, but as a group, as a sector, as a racial category, white people in general enjoy a level of privilege that black people in general do not enjoy. When I go to my native Jamaica, and it's improving, and you fly to America, and you are on sort of 6 to 8 lane motorways, and you see the difference in economic scale. And so you then work not just with the individual black person or the individual white person, but with the systemic nature of how we get along in the world. And so when I speak of white people or black people, it is in the knowledge that some white people are poor and some black people are rich. But I'm really speaking of a meta-narrative about black and white.
Yeah. Now, can I just really pin you down? You're a leading churchman, and you're in what is seen to be a black-led church, a denomination. I'm never quite certain why it is that black people don't come and join mainstream churches such as the Methodists, the Baptists, and the Anglicans. Could you tell us something about why there's this tendency to have black-led separate churches?
It's a long history in this country, but if you go back to what's known generally as the Windrush era, run about the late 1940s and so on, Second World War, 1948, the landing of the SS Empire Windrush. It's not SS, but let's call it the SS Empire Windrush, which most people tend to go back to. In that cohort of people who both came on that ship, but who also came on many other ships, in that cohort of people coming into the country for mainly economic reasons, were people who belonged in the Caribbean, mainly Jamaica, but across the Caribbean, to the Church of England, the Anglican Church, to the Catholic Church, the Methodist Church, the Baptist Church, and the predecessors of the URC. And some of them belonged to Pentecostal churches too. Now, those who belong, let's say, to the Methodist Church, since I'm talking to you, in the Caribbean, when they came here, the first thing they did was to look for the Methodist Church. Many of them found the local Methodist Church. And what they also found was a rejection, which was almost all pervasive, wherever they went, a racist rejection of them. The Pentecostal churches were largely established here by people from the Caribbean who belonged to those Pentecostal churches in Jamaica, who didn't find those churches when they got here. So if you belong to the New Testament Church of God, for example, you came into Birmingham in 1948, let's say, the New Testament Church of God was not here. So what happened was the Pentecostal churches made contact with their headquarters in America and said, where is the church in England? Well, there's no church in England. Start one. So they started meeting in the bedrooms, in the living rooms, and so mostly rented, of course, those days, didn't own many houses. And so they started those meetings in their homes. And what happened was the people that were being rejected racially from, let's say, the Methodist Church, found a home in those Pentecostal churches that were being started by the Pentecostals. And so that tradition has continued on. I can tell you, as a person who spent my formative years since mid-teens in England, well, all the years since mid-teens living in England, that as a young man, an enthusiastic Christian, and there were many of us, when we went evangelizing and giving out tracts, inviting people to accept Christ as Savior, we did not discriminate. And I can tell you that for a fact. The Peel Street church that I went to, which is now Aberdeen Street, we used to go knocking on those doors. We didn't look for the black homes. We knocked on every door. What we found was that because the messenger was black, you were talking to mainly white people, the same racism that made them pull away from the black people who came into the Methodist church, into the chapel or the sanctuary, saw them pulling away from you in wider society as well. Mm. So I would put down the fact that we've got black churches and white churches today less to black people's intention to establish black churches, yeah, and more to the kind of racialized space that we inhabit, which means that all overtures to white people to say, we've got a church here, would you come, were met with no thank you very much. And equally so, if we came into the churches where white people were, it was also a case of, we'd rather not have you here. Now, you know, but it goes a bit deeper than that, though, because the reality of me as a black Christian in a racialized space like this country means that I am eternally grateful that the Peel Street, Aberdeen Street Church of God of Prophecy, into which I have been nurtured over the last 50 years, was there and is there. Because what it has meant is there has been a space that I can be me, and I can be nurtured and loved by people who understand me without having to dig too deeply to find out, you know, who on earth are you? So inadvertently, it has served a useful social, spiritual, nurturing space, a space which has helped to shield some of us, give us some respite from the racism that is all around you as well. And in my case, it has empowered me to be able to lead a life and a ministry which has seen me not just cocooned in that space, but empowered me to take my ministry well beyond that into mainstream society as well.
Well, can I ask you a question? I've read your autobiography, and I found it quite moving when you described how, for example, you were called by a potential employer Sambo, quite insulting, but he turned out to be quite a good guy in his own way. We still have migrants coming into this country. They come from Eastern Europe, or they come from Africa. Many of them come as refugees. What advice would you give them about how to settle into this country, using your own experience?
Well, what you're citing there is an interesting example of, you know, how you navigate a space like in this country. And it is the case that that person who called me Sambo then went on to be an excellent colleague for several years after that. And I also may just say that at pretty much every critical point in my own life in this country, there has been a good white person there as well. So it's interesting. I tend to go back to scripture when I come to answering this question, right? And I go back to the prophet Jeremiah, who I love. I've got a brother named Jeremiah as well. So I go back to Jeremiah. Jeremiah 29 is a chapter in Jeremiah that speak to me. But the whole book of Jeremiah speak to me. It is saying to the Jews who have been taken captive into Babylonian exile under Nebuchadnezzar, now that you find yourself in Babylon, just accept that that's where you are, in exile. But remember that your roots are in Judah, in Jerusalem. The temple may be destroyed, but you have a spiritual heritage that is very clear, has historic roots. Never forget that. And whilst you now find yourself in Babylon, settle down, settle in for the long haul, build your houses and live in them, plant your fields and eat from them, marry, give your children into marriage, have children, expand in the space where you are, and just be there, be there. Exile, Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon will have to reckon with you from that position of historic strength and contemporary strength. That's why when somebody says to me, you know, Sambo, to be truthful, I was quite young, and you know, the insult may have been lost on me at the time, but I've learned something from it, which is to say this: what that experience and that relationship showed was that that person, that white man who called me Sambo, was using the language that he knew. The reality that within an hour he was giving me a check for £300 to say, go and pay your bills and come and work with me, shows that in his heart, the mouth that said Sambo was reflecting not so much a heart condition, but a language and an understanding of the world as he had it. So for the person coming into that exilic space, I say to people, don't be overly anxious about words and terminologies, because sometimes that can be misleading. Try to see if you can build relationship with people, get past the hello, because some people who will hug you when they first meet you will stab you in the back at the next time.
We know that, don't we? Yes, yes.
Some people who may not seem so warm and well disposed towards you, whether because of what they say, like that guy, or by some other means, may actually turn out to be your friend. Never judge a book by its color, I was told when I was young. So I do give people that advice. Don't be too emotive about it. Recognize that you are in an exilic space, and the people in that space will respond to you in different ways. And it will take you some time to work out who your friends really are.
Right. Well, Joe, we're coming to the end of this discussion now, but can I just say that it's been really nice. We've started on what was quite a negative global perspective of slavery and Black Lives Matter, but somehow your Christian commitment and your Christian faith has ended our discussion on a very, very positive note and an optimistic note. And that's very important. And I certainly hope at our church that we are welcoming to people from all sorts of different ethnic backgrounds and all sorts of different histories. I'm sure we don't get it right, but I hope one day you'll pop in and join us.
I hope so. I wonder if I can give you one little last nugget before we close.
Yes, please.
Which is to say that I ended up talking about my relationship with white people. I ended up doing my PhD in Sheffield. And it started by me receiving a letter through my door from a white man who said, "Dear Joe, I hear that you are now in Sheffield. I'd like you to come and visit us at the Urban Theology Unit."
Yeah.
The man who I never knew, and that guy stayed with me all through my studies. But the heart of my studies, my PhD studies, was a word called respect. And in fact, that's the title of the book that came out of it, Respect, Understanding Caribbean British Christianity. And what I'm really trying to tell you now is that the word respect is something I carry with me. It comes from, in this setting, from the Latin respectio, re meaning back or again, specio from which we get spectacles. So respect in that sense means to look back, to look again. And I have shared with folks, and I share with you now, that better relationships come through respect, through looking back, looking again and again at you, and you looking again and again at me, until you understand me and I understand you. We may not even like each other when we understand each other, but we will understand why we don't like each other, the reasons why you don't like me, but we will have an understanding. And I say to folks today, genuinely, that respect is a key to building strong communities.
Thank you. That's a really good point to end.